can I say, first of all, what a privilege it is to share a platform, even for a few moments, with people who have made such a long-term commitment to human rights. And particularly, I hope you remember, as I will, the words of Nurit Peled, which were deeply shocking and deeply moving. And if we need one other reason to be here, it's what Nurit said, because it goes to the heart of why we need to take this very, very seriously. Despite the attempts to keep the journalists away from Gaza, we saw enough images to know that what Nurit said was true. And we know also the silence of the great powers. And when history comes to be written, I think this will be seen as one of the great crimes of the last decades, because of the cold-blooded massacre that we witnessed. And I think we have it, unless we take a stand against it, we are complicit. And I think we have to take this very, very seriously. I hope that the tribunal will be rigorous in its assessment of evidence, so that we shall have an absolutely secure foundation for the accusations of the breaches of international law. And I'm sure the people who give evidence will be tested, and that what they say will be scrutinized, because it is very important, because no one else is doing it. It is very important that at the end of the tribunal we have absolutely secure evidence of the breaches of the law. But also we want to see the chain of command. Who sold the weapons? Who gave the weapons? Who provided the subsidies? Who are the traders? Who are propping up this regime? We need to know. We need to know, because in the end they will have to pay. In the end they will be found guilty. And if that is a massive task for the tribunal, but we have to name the guilty men and women, we have to name the guilty countries, we have to name the guilty states, because behind the criminals stand the big criminals. And they said that Sattar died when Henry Kissinger was given the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, I think if it had any life, it died again when Tony Blair was appointed envoy to the Middle East. Here is a man who was one of the prime movers of the illegal war in Iraq, sent to judge war crimes. What kind of lunatic world do people think we're living in? How can this man, who himself should be before the International Court, be any judge of international law? I think there's a related issue, and that is that not only do we have to establish the facts, but we and the people in this room, as representatives of the press and television, we have a job to do as well, because it's dropping out of the headlines. It certainly is in my country. It's dropping out of the headlines. We have to keep it in the forefront of people's perception. And worst of all, there is creeping into the way the news is presented a moral equivalence between the Israeli actions and the Palestinian actions. Never mind that for every Israeli dies, 100 Palestinians die. Never mind that one is the violence of the oppressor and the other is the violence of the oppressed. Nevertheless, there is a moral equivalence creeping into the coverage of this story, and that is something we absolutely have to oppose. And finally, may I say that I hope that at the end, the tribunal is able to take the long view, because these aberrations that we've seen over the last few years, and particularly in Gaza, are as a result of the contradictions of the original settlement, in my view, of 48. That if you have a state based on race, this is what will happen. And I know there have been recently statements or presentation about the rise in anti-Semitism. Well, of course, we all abhor racism in whatever form, wherever it comes. But nothing has been a greater instigator of anti-Semitism than the self-proclaimed Jewish state itself. And until we deal with that, until that is acknowledged, then racism, I'm afraid, will be with us. So good luck to the tribunal. May it do brilliant work, I'm sure it will, and may you please report it. Thank you. Investigations like the Russell Tribunal don't have an immediate effect. They don't have the strength to impose their findings. Nevertheless, they create a climate of opinion in which it becomes harder and harder for Israel's sponsors, like the United States and the other European countries, those who are supporting these crimes. It becomes harder and harder for them to keep that position. If the evidence is irrefutable, is well presented, is internationally authenticated by respected jurists and professionals, the stronger that evidence is, the more difficult it is for Israel's patrons to supply them with the weapons and the goods to keep up their bad practices and their oppression of the Palestinians. So it has a real function. Also, if we lose sight of international law, it will disintegrate. I mean, if we lose sight of the Geneva Conventions and its demands, it won't be there for the future. If we lose sight of the judgments of international law, if we say they don't count for anything, then in the end we shall lose every semblance of international law. So what's at stake here is international law itself. And without international law, then, as was said in the tribunal, we live in the jungle. So it's a matter for everyone who respects humanity that a tribunal like this is successful. I think that the role of independent media is very important because we need a record of what is happening in the war. For example, in the massacres in Gaza, the world needed to see the crime that was being perpetrated. So the role of those images and where the fact that they are shown on other channels like Al Jazeera is very important. I think we mustn't underestimate the continuing power of the state media, whether in Britain or in Europe or in America. The big mass media channels still control public opinion. And the independent cameramen, the independent journalists can subvert it, but only to a point. I mean, we still need to challenge the big media operators, CNN, the BBC, ITN in our case. We need to challenge them. But in my experience, they're not monolithic. Within the big organizations, there are people who are trying to get the real story out. So the more they have the images and the stories available, the more the people inside the big organizations can make a case for broadcasting them. So I think the independent journalists and cameramen have two jobs. One is to record the images, tell the stories, get them out somewhere. And secondly, to provide a resource for the journalists in the big organizations, which is so strong that the big organizations can't turn their backs on the stories.